Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Christina Lingeau. Earlier this week, you reported on the ongoing issues with mass transit, but this time as it relates to some of the very big events that we have going on in Philadelphia next year. As we all are probably aware, it's the 250th birthday of America, so that'll be a big draw for Philadelphia. We have the FIFA World Cup, plus not to mention all the other sporting events and other things that bring a lot of tourism to the city. And so we haven't really gotten into that aspect of how transit funding is now a big concern. So talk a little bit more about what's been discussed.
Yeah, so it actually came up in the context of preparing for security issues with America 250 and MLB All-Stars and FIFA World Cup, all the things that you said. So when they're looking at big events like this, they obviously have to consider all these different security aspects. So some of the security that they're looking at is weather, right? Most of these things are happening in the summer. So there's going to be heat and there's very likely to be severe storms at some point in that long of a span of time, because that's how the weather in Philadelphia works. So those are two things that they're looking at. But then the big question is how people are moving around and whether or not that is safe, right? They expect people to want to use public transit, especially because we're looking at people who are coming from out of the country, out of the state. They're not bringing their cars, right? And even if they did, no one wants to drive around a gridlocked Philadelphia to go to a baseball game or to see Independence Hall, right? So they're going to try to take public transit. Right now, we've got some major service cuts that have already started impacting Philadelphia area. And so even though SEPTA has been all on board for preparing for America 250 and really enthusiastic about it, I think they were, of course, incredibly disappointed to see the legislature just fail to meet the deadline on funding transit, which means that they have to make those cuts regardless of what events are coming up. And one of the big concerns that they noted was that for now, it's possible to reverse these cuts, right? They could say, oh, we got a funding deal done in the House this week. Well, really in the Senate, because the House has completed several different funding deals. They could kind of turn back the clock now, but the longer they go with less service, the more they have to reduce their workforce, of course, because you don't need as many people when you don't have as many routes. And once they do that, it's a lot harder to get reduced workforce back and trained and ready to go by next summer. So that's a big concern.
You're right about that. The timeline, from where we're sitting, summer of 2026 can feel really far away, but I think anybody knows as an adult that it will go by in the blink of an eye. And with SEPTA in particular, it seems like, standing from the position that we are in, watching and waiting for the budget, anything to happen, there seems to be pressure mounting, not specifically from this issue, but just in general about getting a deal done, because not only is this the biggest headline maker as far as what the legislature is not doing, but there is the rest of the budget that's being held up as well. And you talked about getting a deal done. The big divide was, for a long time, how do we fund that? Democrats wanted to use a portion of the sales tax. Republicans want to use something called the Transportation Trust Fund, which is generally thought of for capital improvement or railway improvement, things that make the SEPTA system safer and more efficient, right? And it sounds like from other reports in the media that Shapiro, who was generally or is on the side of sales tax, that he is apparently more open to the idea of using the Transportation Trust Fund, but with more requirements than the Senate's original plan was. And that would require a more stable form of funding in the future, because we can't just patch the hole that SEPTA currently has in its budget and its problems, because as you can see, we can't be in the same situation a year later. It's not going to help with our security issues that are coming up in Philadelphia. And was there any discussion about what were the ways to address this? Is it really mainly just like, let's get the funding so that we can have the people, or did they have any other ways that we could deal with this?
I think that is the primary thing that they need right now is a permanent, stable funding source so that they can plan for events like this. But I think that there are other things that they're looking at, because they can't count on it now. So the city is certainly trying to plan around it. Some of the things that they are doing, the city itself is making huge infrastructure investments. So I know there's hundreds of millions going into improving the Philadelphia International Airport. There are road expansions for anticipated larger traffic. The director of 2026 for the city was talking about how they are planning these really cool routes that are going to essentially take people through different neighborhoods and bring attention to different neighborhoods to try to support residents. Because a lot of times when we have these massive events, it's at the expense of the people who live there, whether they're, less able to access services, or, things in their town kind of get messed up in order to serve these big events. So they're trying to subvert that and highlight different neighborhoods rather than take away from them through the process. So those kind of infrastructural investments may help take some of the burden off of SEPTA, but ultimately it's still a lot of people who need to move. And so you need trains to move them, and buses.
I get nervous when, as much as these new routes sound great, especially for anyone who's ever had to sit on the highway waiting to get into the Philadelphia airport. It's a nightmare. But with PennDOT, and I think a lot of people go through this in a lot of states, but from our perspective, it feels like a project that's supposed to take 2 years takes 10. So I have my concerns that they could get these things up and going in a year. So again, that really puts the pressure back on SEPTA to do something like to fill the gap, really. And so and we would be remiss not to mention Pittsburgh, because they have the NFL draft coming up. And so they have a transit authority that also has to deal with these cuts, and also has to deal with needing to increase service while also dealing with less money. Were they mentioned at all during this?
So in this particular conversation was happening in Philadelphia, but certainly the major draw of the big event in a big city like Pittsburgh was not lost on the group. But in this case, I mean, we are actually seeing America 250 events planned throughout the entire state. So theoretically, when we're talking about the transit aspect of things, that actually is used in all 67 counties. We don't think about it much in our more rural counties, but it is a part of how people get around. So we might not be seeing huge crowds showing up to somewhere in Perry County, the way that we're seeing huge crowds showing up in Philly and Pittsburgh. But nevertheless, there are events happening where they do need public transit available, and that gets funded with the same funding that we use for SEPTA. Of course, SEPTA gets more of it, but a lot more people use SEPTA.
Right. It's a proportional type of thing. All right. Well, it seems like we're talking about transit every week, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So to keep up with this story and more, follow us at thecentersquare.com/Pennsylvania.